Hello, this is Joseph Cadotte of Old Sins with my partner Elizabeth Kidder. And we're doing our game mastering and writing discussion again. As you can see, I kind of learned how to write backwards so you can actually read that, but my handwriting is atrocious, so it says a starting town, not a stuttering town. Today we're going to be discussing. Alright, the last time we discussed some of the root things you need to do in order to make a campaign. You know, all the basic research and so on that you need to go through and things you needed to think about when you make a campaign. That's great, and you should always be doing that. However, you're going to want to start playing or writing well before you finish all this. So, you're going to try to inhabit the world. So, we want to talk to you about creating a seed which the world can go from. Again, as we admonished you last time, make sure you write everything down, because otherwise you're going to regret it because in the long run, and you will have lost some useful information. Make little maps, make sketches. It doesn't matter if you're good at sketching. I'm not, but I do anyways. Just so you have references to look at when you go back to this eventually. This also dovetails into the hero's journey with the starting town. Elizabeth, do you want to talk more about that? Because you are up on your Campbell, I believe.
The interesting thing I find about your starting town is that it kind of becomes a microcosm of what you're going to experience later. Regardless of whether it's a bustling hamlet that trade comes through all the time, or whether it's a really isolated, secluded, out on the edges of civilization town, it kind of spells themes and ideas that you'll see again and again throughout your story. It's kind of like a good example of this is Last Unicorn. Last Unicorn starts off in a forest where people don't really live at all, and it sets up as being very far, very out of the way. No one ever goes there. Only unicorns are there. And then her journey mirrors us learning more and more about the world that she inhabits. She goes from faraway field to a small little country circus, to bigger, more well-known woods, to towns, to taverns, to kingdoms, to the ocean. It gets bigger and bigger as her worldview gets bigger and bigger. So when you're thinking about your campaign, it's a good idea to see if you can have the town or the starting area mimic or reflect in some way what you anticipate your hero's journey to become. Something that would lend them towards leaving this town in such a store, or something that reflects what's wrong with this world and how you need to address it.
Yeah. One thing you need to remember about starting towns is they are frequently where your characters will end up as well. At least at some point. They may not finish there, but if we look at Star Wars, Luke starts off isolated in the middle of nowhere with only his long-suffering uncle and aunt putting up with him, and he ends up in the middle of nowhere, a much lusher and more habitable environment, but again with long-suffering nuns putting up with him. And there is frequently a reflection of where you start is how you go and how you end up. He has to return to Tatooine to rescue Han, for example. And, desolation seems to follow him, or he seems to go to it in Hoth, is another example. And so I think this is a key element when you create your starting town, is to recognize, as you said, that it has the core of what the adventure will be in it.
Yeah. And you can even have it where, again, much like we said before, you can kind of build after you go there. You start there, you have perhaps a seemingly unrelated incident, but that can later blossom into something much larger and bigger. Say you help with a minor task that may become of major importance to you later down the road. And I like what you say about returning back to it from whence you came, unintentionally. But I do believe that every D&D, like written out, acted out story, television show that I've seen, they always end up right back where they started. And I'm not sure if that's just a trope at this point, or if it's more like you said, that it just makes sense to end at the beginning.
Well, I mean, if you look at, say, Odysseus' journey in the Odyssey, he starts in Ithaca, has a whole bunch of stuff happen to him, sleeps with women for how long does he stay with the Circe and what's her name, the other witch slash goddess?
Isn't it 7 years?
7 years with one and like 3 years with the other. So most of the time he's gone in the Odyssey. Of the 10 years he's gone, he's like hanging out on someone else's island, being their boy toy. But regardless, he always comes back to Ithaca, and that's his fundamental drive, to go back to Ithaca. Of course, Ithaca is completely different than when he left, because his son, who he never met, is grown up. His dog has somehow lived at least 21 years. His wife is still lovely and so on, but she's developed a lot of strength and power in her own right. But returning to a hometown which has changed in ways that reflect the maturity of the characters really can help show what themes you're trying to get across. Now, we do this in D&D all the time because it's easier to go back to something where the characters are well developed, and it's easy to go back and say, oh no, your dad's in trouble again. Okay? But the threat is something which is larger and larger and larger each time. As you said, the seed threat is something relatively trivial, something appropriate to an introductory character. But it spawns something greater in the long run, or it can trigger something that would happen down the road. And that's something you want to remember when you're creating a narrative, is that what can this cause?
Yeah, your starting town can also give your characters humanity, whether it's ones that you're developing or ones that your players are. In your starting town, you don't know anything the first time around, so you have to ask and inquire and make friends and wheel and deal and go to the tavern and drink and eat. Then you go off on your adventures, and then every person you see, you kill and loot. But then eventually, you come back to starting town, and it can be a good way to draw out who your character has become or who they are. Like, oh, well, I wouldn't just kill this person and steal their stuff. I know this person.
Mm-hmm.
Who served me while I was here. They were the ones I saved from the lava monster. I would want to be nice to them. Yeah, and like you said, the story, the starting town can reflect something about the world at large or about your character at large. Whether it's the typical "I don't really fit in here, do I" sort of motif of a person in a town that just doesn't seem to fit them, or you start off big fish in a little pond, come back and realize the world has changed vastly since you were there last, and how you've grown as a person.
And one thing I want to emphasize is that starting town doesn't have to be a literal starting town.
Oh, no.
What it is it's a contained location and set of characters which they know. For example, Peter Parker's starting town is in New York, which is not a small town. But in the school he goes to in Queens is very small. There's Flash Thompson, there's Mary Jane, there's Gwen Stacy, there's a whole bunch of other characters who later on become very, very important. Right, Harry Osborn, all of who become very, very important in the long run. But in reality, his world, despite being in a city of millions, is maybe 20 people.
We're all father figures for some reason.
Yes. Well, I don't know if Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy are father figures.
Perhaps not, but it's amazing how many of Peter Parker's villains turn out to be his father.
But that's the idea. This is something for another podcast. But a good villain reflects the hero in some way or other. All of Batman's villains are crazy and usually hyper wealthy or overpowered in some realistic way. Well, you know, and Peter Parker's are almost all science villains who are mentor figures. You know, the great villains are the ones that are like the character, but we'll go into that deeper later on. But
for my campaign, the starting town was a boat.
yes,
I literally started with them on the dock saying, all right, you want to get on the boat? Let's go. We're going on an adventure. And the first characters they talked to, the first monster encounter, the first puzzle all took place on this boat before we even got to where the adventure proper was.
mm-hmm.
At the end of it, they got back on the boat to sail off onto another adventure. So town is such a loose word. Could mean anything. You could be stuck in one room. Your town could be one room that you've never left before, a jail cell that you've been confined to, and finally you're released out of prison, and now you have to make your way in the world that you don't understand anymore.
Yes. However, and the starting town is a good shorthand because most folklore and a lot of myth starts in a small town where, like, the third son of a third son or seventh son of a seventh son or the third daughter or so on has to deal with all the local problems that they have in this tiny little town, Hobbit Town, which is a horribly named place in Lord of the Rings, is a classic example of this. There's like 20 characters who you were introduced to. Many of them become important later, and every time they come back to it, you know, in the longer.
Yeah, and I like to compare it to a hub world in a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you keep coming back to again and again, whether because you have new abilities, now new things are opened up, or whether you need to buy or shop or talk to someone that you
right.
behind.
So, what other features do you look for when you create a starting town?
I like to have one intriguing NPC. So I like to have one character when they enter into, like, I describe the buildings, like, oh, let's go into this one. Like, okay, in here you find, people seated, and then this person who catches your eye, and they're wearing a distinctive cloak, and they're missing one leg, and they have this brood about them. I always like to try, not every character, not every player falls for it, but I try to have an interesting NPC that encourages them to say, okay, how do we approach this person? How do we learn more about them? How do we get the lay of the land, as it were, by talking to this guy or girl that would draw their attention? NPCs, I find, are the most easy way to flesh out your town, besides just, you want a map, you want definite businesses and how the economy's doing, but having an idea of what the people are like there. Are the people in good spirits because times are prosperous? Are they all very down the dumps because there's war going on? Are they all very secretive of each other because there are spies about? NPCs can set the mood really quickly for your town. Even if the town looks okay, it could actually be worse.
Yeah. And one thing that I like to do is I like to have everybody who the players meet who's a named character have something for them to do. Okay, a minor task to a major task. Ideally, minor tasks that snowball into major tasks. Like my beer's gone missing, and eventually, several sessions later, they're hunting down a slavery ring where they've been drugging the beer, and giving it to people, giving it to sailors to collect them for some sort of horrible sacrifice that's coming up. A lot of my stories end up with horrible sacrifices, or actually start out with horrible sacrifices. But that's, every... And this goes on to railroading, which we have to talk about later. But one of the ways that you get people interested is by giving them a variety of choices to start with. Like...
Or at least the appearance of a variety of choices.
Yes. Again, we'll go into railroading later. But, so what they do is an NPC you may want them to like, they will not like. That will not happen. Okay? This is true. Writing a novel or playing D&D is you're going to have an NPC or a secondary character who you've put a lot of effort into that is just absolutely useless. Okay? And they're going to be fascinated by the piano player who you mention in one sentence just once, and they're going to be like, oh, well, I'm a bard. I'm going to see if I can perform with the piano player and make money. And then you find out that the piano player has to, I don't know, harvest some Rapunzel in order to appease a witch so he can continue playing, because in the next day his fingers are going to fall off if he doesn't do that, so he hires the adventurers. That's literally off the top of my head, obviously. So, but, be open to that sort of thing happening, because it will happen no matter what medium you're making these things in. You're going to want to force the one-legged man that you created, Elizabeth, into being the one that people want to talk to, but no, it won't be. It's like, you're too much of a flashing quest icon.
A good way, I think you're familiar with that. Sometimes the characters will not talk to them. So I think the important thing is that there are no small parts, only small players. It's an acting adage, but the gist of it is that if they want to talk to the piano player, then make sure that you've thought of something that they could talk about. Don't have them just be background filler. Don't let it be in a part of the video game where you can't interact with background. Because don't you always hate that? Like, oh, it's always detail into it, but then you can only get like within 6 feet of the thing and then no further, and no, you can't talk to anyone or touch anyone. It just doesn't feel nearly as real or natural or immersive.
No.
So only mention people if you're ready to give them a backstory, and let your characters fall in love with them.
And you don't really have to do much in that regard. You could have a pool of people who the story of, if you don't give the witch her Rapunzel, which by the way is the name of a leafy green, and that's how Rapunzel got her name.
So pregnancy cravings, man.
Yeah, pregnancy cravings. If you don't give the witch her Rapunzel, it could be the smith who loses his fingers, or any number of other characters. You just need to have some basic stories which can be told arbitrarily, that can work for a certain subset of characters,
Yeah.
So
allowing your characters to grow is what honestly creates some of the cooler characters in my book. Characters that were mentioned in one page, then gone the next, became characters that evolved into giant world-building examples.
Yes.
Which was really great. And in writing as in D&D.
Yeah, and I want to say that the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, this is the backgrounds. Again, it's inverted because of the way we're recording this. But the background section, it has flaws, bonds, etc. That is a great way to quickly fill out a character. The Dungeon Master's Guide is honestly one of the best writing guides I've seen in a long time. I wouldn't put it up there with Stephen King's book on writing, which is called On Writing.
Yeah.
But it's better than at least half of them, if not more, in terms of like pointing out how you have to flesh things out and get your characters and your environment sort of interwoven, which is crucial. And that's one of the other reasons you work on a starting town, because if you have a small number of characters in a small bound environment, it's easy to get them integrated. Whereas if it's a large environment, and you know,
They go anywhere. Yeah.
yeah, and you may want your characters to go anywhere eventually, but remember that you have to write all that before they get there. You know, even if you're playing improv D&D, like I like to, you still have to, write it ahead of them. So, um, now in your book, Colorblind, there's a starting town and then a secondary starting town.
Yeah. Part of the opening was deciding how to introduce the world they were living in. And I figured it best to show the very best than to then show the very worst as the most dramatic means of showing what you could be versus what you are. I would say that the starting town, to be honest, is actually the wood. And perhaps because most of the interesting action happens there, probably because it's the place the characters go to most often and take up the most scenes in. But I would say the town is actually, the starting town is actually something that shows up a little bit of the ways in and isn't even a town but an entire forest.
See, I viewed it differently in that the woods are almost always coded as the woods, oddly enough. Folklore, usually, and yours is derived from folklore. But the starting town is almost always at the edge of the wild place, which is the woods. It's the last outpost of civilization, before you get to Mos Eisley. Or
it's a very small house, the last one on the block before you get to the big creepy trees.
yes, if you're doing a haunted house story, it's the diner or the gas station they stop at where they get warned, oh, don't go up to the old McGurnley place because, horrible things have happened there.
Exactly.
That's kind of the starting environment, because once you get into the woods, that's where the actual adventure happens. Adventure tends not to happen in the starting town. This adventure can be brought there, but it doesn't tend to happen there. It's more along that this is what sets the stage for everything that comes.
That's fair enough. And I guess since I have two protagonists, that makes a lot more sense to have the town be one starting town for one character and the castle be another starting town for another character. It's only when they both leave those and go out into the world that things start to change.
Yeah, you have to leave safety.
Yeah. I will say my first starting town is a bit of a cheat. It's a bit of a stutter stop, and this is where we are, no wait, crash, cut to.
Yes. So, horrible thing happens and we have to move.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's really not the start of adventure, which is usually the normal way you get out of your little town. I think we need to come back to this starting town every so often as we go forward, as we develop, because like I said, the town should change whereas the characters change, or at least their vision of the town should change as the characters change.
Yeah.
I think most people have experienced coming back home after being away at school or at a job or something after some years and realizing things aren't the way they remember.
Yeah, that the meeting of your nostalgia and reality is one of the more powerful experiences, more probably universal experiences that a human being can experience, going back and realizing that it wasn't, maybe never was as you thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Just a really different place altogether.
Yes. So, any last thoughts?
Don't let your starting town be just a town. Definitely think about the different ways that you can let your NPCs and town reflect your character and your story.
Mm-hmm. And if you could, please comment and subscribe to this and share it around if you like it.
If there are topics that you hear us touch upon but we haven't talked about yet, they may be in the works, but go ahead and say, oh, could you expand more on railroading or this and that, so we know that we're heading in the right direction with these discussions.
Yes. And if you don't think we did it right, we will be happy to make a video. We'll happy to respond to you, and we'll also be happy to make a video of like most common complaints. So don't hesitate to say anything. All right. Thank you for your time, and I'm Joseph Cadotte, and that's Elizabeth Kidder. So good day.